Hey everyone, hope your day's going well. Be prepared to meet the psychopath who invented your breakfast or someone's breakfast. I just reacted to a video about banned foods, from the US that were banned in certain EU countries and stuff. And, there was a section about cereal, and I remembered something about John Kellogg's and the origin story of cereal, and I kind of touched on it lightly, but I didn't want to go into it too much because it was so long ago that I read about it, and I might have been misremembering things. So, based on this title, I might have been, not too far off. So let's see and refresh our memories here and listen to this. All right, man.
Hey, 42 here. Back in the early 1900s, if you were an affluent American who suffered from poor health, you may have considered a short stay at Battle Creek Sanitarium. The SAN, as it was often called, was a world-renowned health complex that sprawled across 30 acres of land in Michigan. Its pamphlet promised a cool and delightful summer resting place. And it wasn't wrong. As guests entered the gates, they were greeted with the words mens sana in corpore sano, meaning a healthy mind in a healthy body. They'd see people sunbathing in the gardens or enjoying a stroll through the picturesque woods, and stepping into the lobby, they'd be welcomed with fine furniture, crystal chandeliers, and plush Persian rugs. They might also hear the occasional scream from a remote treatment room, but we'll get...
Okay, there it is. There it is. It was like all these things sound so nice and so, like, ooh, yeah, I want to go there. But what's the catch here? When something sounds so good that it almost cannot be true, it usually is. Battle Creek Sanitarium.
To that later. The SAN was the go-to destination for the health-conscious elite. Wandering through its vast hallways, you could bump into the likes of Henry Ford, President Warren Harding, or Thomas Edison. You might even see a peculiar-looking man cycling around in a white suit and white shoes with a white cockatoo perched on his shoulder, dictating notes to a man scurrying behind him. That man would be Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, the founder of Battle Creek Sanitarium, and the poor fellow behind him, his younger brother, William Kellogg. John Kellogg was a celebrated health guru, a highly eccentric individual who made it his life's mission to improve America's mind, body, and soul. He arguably created the whole concept of wellness. The industry all the crazies hang out in. And thanks to...
Goop always catching strays. But yeah, man, I did not know about that. All right. Interested to see where this is going, man. This is a great way to learn, man. Just sharing this with you all and then getting some feedback as well from people who know a little bit more about this. Oh, man.
To his unwavering passion for good health, we now have the delicious, easy-to-prepare breakfast cereal known as Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Now, I'm sure you've heard John Harvey Kellogg's name crop up plenty of times before, and you may have even heard that he invented Kellogg's Corn Flakes to stop people from masturbating.
Yeah,
which I'm delighted to tell you is entirely true. But what you might not know is that this isn't even close to the weirdest fact about John's life and his personality. Far, far from it.
Wow, all right. Okay, so that's the part that I knew about. So now we're going to get into some of the other things, the nitty gritty. Well, I guess, Kellogg, very, very famous cereal. Masturbation, very, very famous as well. So they both are still at the top of their game. So they're not mutually exclusive. So I guess mission failed, but then again, partly, still made it to the top in terms of cereal.
As we're about to find out, John Kellogg makes Gwyneth Paltrow seem sane. John's dedication to health isn't surprising. Not only was he a sickly child himself, but out of his 16 siblings and half-siblings,
Guess they
6
weren't
died
doing
from
any
infectious diseases.
self-love.
And unfortunately, for the ones who did manage to stay alive, their parents didn't bother to give them an education. You see, they were Seventh-day Adventists, so they didn't really see the point. When the second coming of Christ was just around the corner, presumably Jesus didn't care too much about good grades when rewarding the faithful. But despite this setback, John was bright, determined, and an avid reader. And so he used any books he could get his hands on to educate himself.
Wow. Okay, I'm seeing some disturbing similarities between me and Mr. John Kellogg. Yeah, I think those are different books, though. Wow, that's interesting. I never knew, but I don't know what Seventh-day Adventists. I don't know too much about this. I don't know is this a part of a group within a religion? I don't know. So another thing to read up on.
His potential, the church supported him through medical school and, upon graduation, placed him at the head of their Health Reform Institute. Under John's leadership, it was renamed as the Battle Creek Medical Surgical Sanitarium. Really trips off the tongue, that one, doesn't it? And he grew it rapidly into a combined medical center, spa, and grand hotel.
The building is nice. So nice. Yo, that's a nice building. Does it still exist?
Sanitarium allowed John to practice what he called biological living, which was heavily inspired by his Adventist beliefs. Essentially, he saw the body as the temple of the Holy Spirit, something that should be nurtured and protected at all costs, and enforced this at the Sun with messianic zeal. Exercise was strongly encouraged, as was fresh air, plenty of sleep, good hygiene, and nutritious, easy-to-digest food.
Hey, so far, he's making sense. I'm so scared what's going to come.
When it came to illness, many of his treatments were grounded in dietary restrictions. He instructed guests to avoid meat, alcohol, tobacco, sugar, and caffeine. Basically all the fun stuff. Most of these treatments seem to make sense. Caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol are addictive drugs, after all. But other practices at the San were a little less conventional. To begin with, John was a firm believer in the methods of Horace Fletcher, also known as the Great Masticator. Fletcher was an influential health faddist who argued that food should be chewed and chewed until liquefied before swallowing. John took Fletcher's advice very seriously and encouraged all his guests to chew their food a jaw-wrenching 40 times before swallowing. He even performed renditions of a chewing song to motivate them, culminating in the resonating chorus, "Chew, chew, chew, that is the thing to do." Clearly his...
No way, man. You can't make this up. That's wild, man. And I should do a better job of chewing, to be fair. I might be one of those people who eats a little bit too fast. And I try to be conscious, the mindful eating, not, in a extreme way, but, try to slow it down a little bit and enjoy. But 40 times, I don't know, man. That's a little bit overkill. It's already dead. So still, chewing is a good advice. Chewing 40 times, that's a job.
His talents were wasted in medicine. When he wasn't serenading his guests in the canteen whilst they furiously masticated, John could be found experimenting with the healing effects of artificial light, a practice that no doubt pleased Thomas Edison during his visits. Patients would be asked to lie down or stand up in a shower of artificial light, kind of like a modern-day sunbed, and it was supposed to cure anything from depression to diabetes. Funny how all these revolutionary health fads just cure anything. After their light.
Hey, but there's a red light therapy and all those kinds of things. That's still, some of them are very, very popular. All the people with some financial means, they have it all set up, all these things. And you have to get up 3 hours before work to get through your entire routine.
bath, guests could continue their cleanse with an enema. For those of you fortunate few who are unfamiliar with the exhilarating world of enemas, it involves shoving a tube up your arse, then pumping salt water into your bowels, in an attempt to give your insides a thorough cleaning out. Why the hell would anyone want to do that, I hear you ask? Well, some people believe enemas can cure constipation, certain celebs claim they can detoxify your intestinal tract, and that they're a surefire way to instantly lose weight. But celebrities also...
hence the meaning of the sentence, you're so full of ish, right? The B-roll that he's using on this video is hilarious at times. That guy was just scratching his behind.
Believe that living off cucumber juice constitutes a healthy, balanced diet. So we probably shouldn't listen to anything they say, ever. But John, being the innovative thinker that he was, decided to take things one step further. He created special machines that could pump an eye-watering 14 litres of water per minute into the patient's bowels.
Whoa,
then he advanced onto giving his patients, especially the most bunged up, yogurt enemas. I'm not joking.
No.
They were instructed to eat half a pint of yogurt. And then the other half? Yep, you guessed it, right up the bumhole. John believed it would provide his guests with protective germs and a squeaky clean intestine. When John wasn't pumping Muller into people's arseholes, he was strapping them into the vibrating chair he'd invented. Unlike today's chairs, which tend to offer a range of massage programs, plush padding, and 3D surround sound, John's was a little more rustic. It had
And when they said yogurt is good for the microbiome, he really took that to another level.
A plain wooden seat which would violently shake you up to 60 times a second. And for anyone who desired something a little more hardcore, you could add a slapping machine to the experience, which would give you the option of being flogged or pounded. If all this vibrating, pounding, and flogging is getting you all excited, then I'm afraid you're out of luck. Because the single most abhorrent sin you could commit at Battle Creek Sanitarium was fornication. John believed that any sex outside of procreation was against nature and the root cause of all society's troubles. Yeah, this is coming from the guy who invented a chair that vibrates and flogs you and enjoyed stuffing yogurt into people's bums. But believe it or not, he practiced what he preached. He was celibate during his 4 decades of marriage. And rather than spending his honeymoon between the sheets with his new bride, he used that time to write about the ills of copulation for his new book, Plain Facts About Sexual Life. Lucky Mrs. Kellogg.
Is this still in print? That's going to be on my reading list.
It wasn't just sex that John loathed. He viewed flirts as lecherous villains who ought to be punished in a purgatory 7 times hotter than hell, and believed that true chastity required purity of thought.
So you can... Oh, okay. That's a bad pause right there. YouTube is going to be mad at me for pausing it right there. People who say that and it's evil, usually behind the curtains, the things that they don't write about or speak about are heinous. They got something to hide usually. I don't know if something ever came out about him, but 4 years of celibacy with his wife, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying that banana either.
For masturbation, he believed it was a violation of natural law that caused a whole range of maladies, from memory loss and impaired vision to epilepsy and even insanity. Tragic news for most of...
They did have that one Seinfeld episode where George abstained and he became like super smart. Remember that episode? And for Elaine, it was right the other way around, right? Yeah, I love Seinfeld.
His guests, no doubt. But to free them from the vile practice, John offered a selection of treatments. To begin with, he would simply tie their hands up when they were alone. Failing that, he would bandage their penis up or place a cage over it. If
Yo, this
penis
guy's a
prison
dom.
wasn't a strong enough deterrent, then Dr. Kellogg was a firm advocate of circumcision, performing the procedure upon himself when he was 37 years old.
Whoa!
He believed it was most effective at stemming masturbation if performed without anesthetic, because it created a
that's crazy.
salutary effect upon the mind. In other words, it made the patients associate touching his penis with absolute pain. And if circumcision didn't work, he would sew the patient's remaining foreskin over the tip of the penis with a needle, and then twist it
that's
to a
mutilation.
close with a metal wire. This
Oh,
barbaric procedure apparently made erections impossible. Bear in mind that most of his masturbation prevention subjects were young boys,
Oh no.
and it reveals the sobering reality that the man who invented your breakfast cereal was one of America's most prolific child abusers.
I could never ever have. Not that I eat it anyway, but no. Oh man.
Girls didn't get
Disgusting.
off lightly either. John would apply pure carbolic acid to the clitoris, or, if that failed, surgically remove it. But, as with any illness, prevention is better than cure, and John believed that the best way to prevent sexual stimulation in the first place was to endure a bland diet. You see, whilst he was growing up, most of America's breakfast food was fatty and stodgy. Things like
First, he's talking about health and biologic living and all of that good stuff. Now, now we're gonna have no nutritional value to curb the sex drive. What?
like porridge, fried bacon, and hot beefsteak were all the norm. So John decided to create a breakfast food that was easier to chew, easier to digest, and bland enough to subdue any hedonistic impulses. John's Puritan mandate gave rise to the now ubiquitous cereal, Kellogg's Corn Flakes. But its creation also heavily involves his little brother, Will. It's fair to say that John and Will had a complicated relationship. Growing up, John pushed him around and even whipped him, despite Will being 8 years his junior. If it was a particularly cold winter's night, he would use Will's back as a foot warmer. Real
Man,
likeable
this guy is
character, this
actually a
John guy, isn't
psychopath,
he?
man.
As adults, and after John had established a sanitarium, he invited Will to work there. But their relationship didn't improve. Will often worked up to 120 hours a week for very little pay, and his duties included keeping John's books, shaving him, and even taking his notes for him when he went to the bathroom. When he wasn't satisfying John's every whim, Will would help out in the sanitarium's kitchen. By 1877, John had invented a kind of breakfast biscuit for his guests. It was a mixture of flour, oats, and cornmeal, which he baked twice at a very high temperature to make it easier to digest. The biscuit, which was blander than a Coldplay album and harder than a rock, caused
Oh, this guy. Why you gotta this? That was uncalled for, man. Oh, man. Yo, this dude was really. This guy was an actual psychopath. You know, he was evil, you know. Damn. It's so weird that became one of the maybe the biggest brand of breakfast cereal of all time, and it's just a staple of, if you think of cereal, you think of that. This dark history. I know this video alone has millions of views, and other videos covering this topic as well. So a lot of people know about, but there's that many more that have no idea about this. You know, because it's in almost every country in the world. How many billions of people have bought this? So a few million that know about this is nothing compared to the people that don't know. Wow. Yo.
one guest to break her tooth. So from that point on, John would smash it into little pieces, creating a kind of granola. Then, one night in 1898, Will accidentally left out a batch of dough. When he returned to it the next morning, it had fermented. He decided to throw caution to the wind and roll it out anyway. And when he did, the bacteria-infused dough produced perfectly thin flakes, that became crispier and tastier once baked. It was the world's first flaked cereal. Will carried on experimenting with his new recipe, and after replacing the wheat with corn, he produced flakes which were even crunchier. The cereal was an instant hit, first with patients at the Sun and then with the wider public once it was advertised in newspapers and on billboards. Now, John couldn't care for profit. His only concern was abolishing masturbation and healing the world one bowel at a time. But Will was a natural-born businessman and knew their cereal would be more competitive if they added sugar to the flakes. Unsurprisingly, John wasn't on board, fearing the sweet taste would cause anyone who ate it to instantly and uncontrollably fondle themselves, and so he forbade his brother from doing anything of the sort. So Will...
Oh man, you know, I did like Tony the Tiger though, and Frosty. Oh. Yeah.
Finally tired of
done.
living under his big brother's shadow, struck out on his own. He bought the rights to manufacture cornflakes and founded the Battle Creek Toasted Cornflake Company in 1906. His cereals were an enormous success, and 3 years later, he was producing 120,000 boxes of cornflakes every day. Will's advertising tactics were as creative as his brother's health treatments, only far less psychotic. His company was the first to include a toy inside the box, and one of the first to include nutrition labels on the box.
Really?
One particularly successful campaign told readers to wink at your grocer and see what you get. A risky strategy, perhaps, and one that would have offended his prudish brother. But those who followed this curious instruction received a free sample of cornflakes, and hence the brand experienced a rapid boost in sales. Sadly, John was less than enthusiastic about his little brother's success. He insisted on using the Kellogg name for the sanitarium's own healthier cereals, and Will, who believed that a tasteless Kellogg cereal would harm his own brand and company, sued him. John sued him back, and the two fought a vicious legal battle for the best part of a decade. The question at the heart of it all was, who was the real Kellogg? John, naturally, believed
Yeah, who was the real guy? Oh, so, you know, it's actually his brother who took it to that higher level. Okay.
that he was. After all, he was the first of the two to make it big, and arguably the most famous doctor in America, whose books had been translated into several languages. But thanks to Will's sizable investment into advertising, Kellogg was now a household name and more or less synonymous with cornflakes. Eventually, Will succeeded, and in 1922, he was finally able to establish the Kellogg Cereal Company. To celebrate, he introduced a famous rooster mascot for his cereal, which came about because he realized the Welsh word for rooster, Kellogg, sounds a little like Kellogg. Cereal was a complete game changer. Gone were the days of getting up early to start the fire just to make porridge or reheating last night's greasy leftovers. Cornflakes were a convenient, nutritious, ready-to-eat breakfast, perfect for the busy masses who'd left the farms to work as employees in factories following the Industrial Revolution. Kellogg Cereal Company led the pack in what became a multi-million-dollar industry. John, meanwhile, was forced to pay the costs of the legal battle.
This is a Tiger King reference. Oh man, remember that timing of that series? It came out right when everybody was locked up, right in the house. Oh, I'm never gonna financially recover from this.
He faded into obscurity and lost much of his credibility. The number of visitors at the Sun dropped dramatically during the Great Depression, and by 1938, he closed its doors forever, left with $3 million in debt. He developed bronchitis 4 years later and died of pneumonia at the age of 91. Although the two brothers hadn't spoken properly in years, John did write a reconciliatory letter to Will. The exact wording of the 7-page document is unknown, but the gist of it was probably, I was a bit of a dick. Maybe I shouldn't have been such a detestable monster. Sorry, bro. Regrettably, John's secretary decided that it was beneath her employer to send such a letter to his nemesis, and so she decided to stash it in her desk. Will didn't see it until he himself was on his deathbed, at which point he reportedly sat up in bed and declared, "My goodness, why didn't someone tell me before this?" They may have been enemies until the bitter end, and sure, one of them was the quackiest quack who ever quacked. But together, they changed the breakfast table forever. Thanks for watching.
They did.
Check out.
Man, that is. Did they ever make a movie about this, man? About these two brothers? Who would play them? Or maybe they already did. I don't know. Wow, this is a great video. Really well made. There's of course a lot more to be explored and more nuance to it. I definitely understand that, but I got the gist of it. Man, that guy was not kind to his brother. He abused him and other people. That is evil. And his brother, man, damn, he really took it to another level. Kellogg. Not sure if I ever can eat it though. It's not good. It's not good for me anyway. I can't do it. I need a nutritious breakfast. Brain food. That's what I need because I can't even talk anymore. Hey, I need to get into more of these type of origin stories. Somebody told me about the Coca-Cola origin story. That's an interesting one as well, which I know bits and pieces of. You pick things up here and there. Are they responsible for Santa Claus? Because here in Belgium is pretty confusing. We have Sinterklaas. So we might need to get into that as well. All right. Thank you for being here, everybody. Hope you have a great day. Peace.